What?
And of course, Ed, makes a joke right before we get started here. I just want to say what a pleasure it is to welcome folks to this evening's event with Jennifer Hillier and Alex Segura, who will be in conversation with the incomparable E.A. Aymar. I have the pleasure of introducing Anthony Award nominated author E.A. Aymar, who now will be known as Ed in my conversation because I can't keep saying that. Ed's most recent thriller, They're Gone, was published in 2020 to rave reviews in Publishers Weekly. It received a Kirkus-starred review and was named one of the best books of 2020 by the South Florida Sun-Sentinel. He is a former member of the National Board of the International Thriller Writers. He is an active member of Crime Writers of Color, the Mystery Writers of America, and Sisters in Crime. He also runs the Noir at the Bar series for Washington, D.C., and has hosted and spoken at a variety of crime, fiction, writing, and publishing events nationwide. He is a tremendous supporter of indie bookstores, and we love Ed. You're in for such a treat tonight. First, I just want to let you know that if you have questions or comments, you can put them in the chat area. And if there's time, we'll get to as many as possible. Ed will be monitoring that throughout. And second, sit back, get ready to enjoy. And please join me in welcoming Jennifer Hillier, Alex Segura, and Ed Aymar.
Thank you so much for that introduction. You set a very high bar, and that is, we're all very nervous right now. But I just want to say thank you to One More Page Books. We were talking before the event started about how they pulled through the pandemic, and it's really a testament to the store, but also how it's beloved in the DMV area. For people outside, that doesn't mean the DMV you're used to. That's DC, Maryland, and Virginia. But readers from all three areas come to One More Page for the event and the warmth and the hospitality, and they're just lovely people. It's my neighborhood bookstore because it's actually not, but I just consider it my neighborhood bookstore. And I'm really excited about the event tonight. It's with two of my favorite writers and one of my closest friends.
Here we go. Buckle up.
Alex Segura and Jennifer Hillier.
Nice.
Alex Segura is the best-selling and award-winning author of Secret Identity, which the New York Times called wittily original and named an editor's choice. NPR described the novel as masterful, and it received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Kirkus, and Booklist. Alex is also the author of Star Wars, Poe Dameron, Freefall, the Pete Fernandez Miami Mystery Series, and a number of comic books, including The Mysterious Microface in partnership with NPR, The Black Ghost, The Archies, The Dusk, The Awakened, and more. His short story, 90 Miles, was included in the Best American Mystery and Suspense Stories for 2021 and won the Anthony Award for Best Short Story. By day, he's the Senior Vice President in Sales of Marketing at Oni Press, with previous stints at Archie Comics and DC Comics. A Miami native, he lives in New York with his wife and children. Wow. And Jennifer Hillier needs
Don't read mine. That's going to not be good after Alex's.
You're a star.
So he's not going to know.
One right hair author. Jennifer Hillier is the author of 7 psychological thrillers, including the best-selling Little Secrets, which was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and the Anthony Award, and Jar of Hearts, which won the ITW Thriller Award and was shortlisted for the Anthony and McCavities. She was born in Toronto but spent 8 years in the Seattle area, which is where she first got published. Her newest novel, Things We Do in the Dark, is coming out this July 19th from Minotaur Books, which I always called Minotaur. And I still think might be Minotaur, but no one's...
It can be for you.
I never think of it to sound
like that. It could be. It's English isn't everyone's first language, Alex. So I want to say thank you so much to both of you for joining tonight. And we were saying beforehand, this is an absolute murderer's year of crime fiction coming out. Your books were both fantastic. I just devour them both in weekends. It's always hard to tell somebody how much you like their work and how you think it's a step forward without sounding like you're slamming the previous work, which isn't the case. It's just these books were so good, and your books keep getting better and better and better. It's a neat, enviable trick that you both have.
We can say the same about you. Hello.
Yeah,
Oh
definitely.
yeah, no.
Having read your
most-
next one, it is definitely a leveling up.
Completely, applies to you too.
Yeah, we're going to spend about 5 minutes on you, and then the next 50.
Then the
on
roast
me.
begins.
Yeah, and
Oh,
it's
God.
mainly going to be about me and my books. But to get you guys out of the way, I have some questions. I have questions for each of you. So you're both award-winning established novelists, and you've each written, as mentioned in the intro, a significant and growing number of novels. What would you say are the key components for each of your work? What makes an Alex Segura novel or a Jennifer Hillier thriller? Oh my gosh, that almost rhymes. Did
Yeah.
you ever know that?
Jennifer Hillier thriller. I know.
Oh, okay. I just
Take
it
it,
just hit
Alex.
me. I just go.
Sure, I
Alex.
can go first. Most of my stories, whether they're comics or novels or what have you, are about people overcoming personal obstacles or, I guess, personal failings to achieve their destiny, which they may not know is their destiny. For Pete Fernandez, it was figuring out he was meant to be a private eye, overcoming his alcoholism, overcoming his own personal failings to kind of achieve what he didn't know he was supposed to be. With Secret Identity and Carmen, it's a very clear goal for her. She wants to work in comics and she wants this dream to come true. But without spoiling anything, what she also wants is to reclaim this character that is so near and dear to her heart. So it's really about, I like to write character-driven stories, whether it's an action thriller with a ton of exploding cars and earth-shattering stuff happening. It's always about the characters overcoming something to become something else.
And
So
Jenny?
good. I write psychological thrillers, and they mostly, except for one book, all star women who have their lives upended by something that they have usually contributed to. And I'm always interested in kind of telling stories about a woman who makes horrible mistakes and then has to fight her way out of the situation that she created. But I also try to make them very emotional. When I started reading thrillers, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of what I read was police procedural stuff. And I read a lot of different series, and that stuff was great. But I found myself wanting to know more about the person in the starring role and how do they feel about stuff. And maybe that's a girl thing, but I wanted to know about them, and are they in love and why not? And are they having sex and why not? I wanted to know these things. I was very curious. And so I think there's a little bit of a voyeuristic element to the way that I tell a story, where I know that I want to peek behind the curtain of someone's life. And so I want to do that for my reader too. Because maybe it's a lot of reality show watching that influences this, where you want to kind of see people doing what they do. But a lot of it is just, I'm nosy. So
For both of you, are those conscious efforts? I mean, or is it just you start writing and, how does it begin for you? Do you start writing and you're telling the story and then you realize like, this is sort of my medium, this is where I go? Or is it from the beginning? Do you look at the story and then plot it first and figure out how you're going to approach it?
I have two answers. I mean, thematically, I'm not a theme writer, meaning I don't go into a work saying this is going to be the theme of this book I'm going to write. It usually comes up after the fact, and that to me works better. Like I can look back now and realize, oh, okay, with the Pete books, I was trying to do this, or with Secret Identity, I was trying to do that. And that's just, I usually want to feel it out through the plot and the story. I have become much more of a plotter than I was at first. And Silent City, my first novel, I very foolishly, I had just heard Michael Connelly speak at BoucherCon, and I raised my hand in St. Louis, and I was like, "Are you a plotter or a pantser?" And he said, "I just start writing." And I was like, "I'm going to be like I'm going to do that." And so I just started writing Silent City. And so, needless to say, Silent City required the most revisions of any of my books, just because the plot just got out of control. And so I've become more and more of a plotter, but I also really believe in letting the characters take you on trips. And so I leave enough room in my outline that if something shows up, or something happens, or there's room for a character to take a detour, that the whole book doesn't come apart. Like there's a character in Secret Identity, Marion, who shows up in the first third. She shows up as kind of this oracle type character. She basically is hinting that Carmen's friend is not all he's meant to be, not all he's cracked up to be. And I thought that was going to be it, but then she just kept showing up. She kept showing up and doing things, and she becomes no, sorry to spoil it, Jen, but she becomes more important towards the end of the book. And I think as writers, we have to have that flexibility, or at least I do, to keep myself interested.
Yeah, you become very efficient, it sounds like, because I feel like all of my books are written the way that your first one was.
How
I
do you
am a
do it? Like, it just
messy, I'm
scares
just
me.
I'm messy when I write, and I don't want to be. Like, I want to go into it with a cohesive idea of what I'm going to say, but like you, right? They take turns, right? Like they
Mhm.
take twists and they go in different directions. And so, like in my novel before the one that's about to come out, Little Secrets, I thought it was going to be a book about cheating, right? And I really thought I'm going to write a book about an affair, and I'm going to write about this woman, this wife who's been cheated on, and then it turned into something like completely different, you know. And so where I start is never like when the book is published where it begins. That first 3 chapters is usually somewhere in the middle. So I
Wow.
think I found my story, but in reality it gets pushed because there's more that happened that led up to that moment. So, but I'm really working on being like a more efficient writer because I waste a lot of time trying to find my idea. And rather than think about it, like I think normal people would, I write my way to that moment, which is like hundreds of thousands of words that then never get in the book, you know? And so I don't know. I
Is
just,
any part of you like scared of messing with your method? Because that sounds like it's working for you.
at this point, kind of, but I feel like, okay, can I cut out some of the crap that I don't need to do? Like, do I really need to write 7 chapters on the guy that works at the 7-Eleven? No, I don't, even though he's interesting, right? There's just, I think and you know this, right? As you get into
Yeah.
it and you write more books, you're smarter about it and you see where the traps are, right? And you're probably less likely to go down a bad path. But that also makes it more challenging because you're like less likely to be experimental. And then of course there's the deadline.
And I also feel like every book has its own unique problem and is equally
For
hard
sure.
in a different way. Like your
For
debut
sure.
is always hard because it's your first. Your second
Yeah.
is hard because you're trying to see if you can do it again. And then for me, each one is challenging in its own weird way.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely
Yeah,
agree.
so I remember one time at, I think it was BoucherCon, Jenny, where you were on a panel, and they asked about your editing process, and you gave a very detailed answer.
Did
You
I? What did I
had,
say?
I'm trying to, there was like a 3 or 4 part thing where like first I write it, then I go through one draft and I
Oh,
look for
yeah, I
these, and
still
then
do that. I still do that.
what can
Yeah,
you, three,
I start at a very macro level, right? So I write the book, and sometimes the first draft is like several mini drafts wrapped up in that
Yeah.
one big draft. But it's always a mess when I finish. It's never how I want it. And I go through it. And as I'm going through it, actually, I make notes of things that I think I need to fix. And so then I refer to that. And then I start to kind of work through the big issues. And usually the big issues will then kind of solve the little issues. And then a third draft is really more about, is it clean? You know, get rid of all the extraneous stuff and then, you know, make sure it's clean and tight. And then what is it? The third draft, fourth draft is nitpicking over things. And which is why I can't write fast because I spend a lot of time on the book before it gets to my editor. And even though I think my editor would help me through a lot of those rough patches, I feel like I still have the feeling that if I send in less than a perfect manuscript, I'm going to get let go from the publisher. I
Your
can't shake
contract has
that
been
feeling.
voided.
Yeah, I think I was like so, you know, like scarred by query hell and, you know,
Oh, yeah.
at first trying to get that first draft perfect to get an agent. I've never been able to ask for help. And I think if I could ask for help, I would, you know, get through it faster. But I feel like people will then know that I'm not really good at this and the jig is up, you know.
But you are. By the time it gets to the reader, it is always very good.
Thank you. That means a lot.
It's true.
it's really tough, right? I think I talked about this with somebody before, and I was talking with a writer who works hand in hand with her editor.
I
And
know
I
someone
thought,
like that too. Yeah.
and I couldn't imagine doing that. You know, it's
Yeah.
taken me a while my agent reads everything before any editor would, and it takes me a while to even get something to her that I feel
Yeah.
I've never really asked her for advice during the writing process.
Yeah.
But I know writers who do it, and I think it would act like you said. I think it would actually help.
It would help. You know,
think,
honestly,
yeah.
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
No, I was just going to say that I was like that too. I'd never really had a collaborative editorial relationship. I mean, by the time I would finish a manuscript and send it to my agent, and then it would go to the publisher. But with Flatiron, I sold it on a partial. So Zach Wagman, my editor, he'd already read a chunk of it and the outline, and so gave notes on that. So it was the first time there was an editorial voice along the way, I guess. And I found it to be really helpful, but I still have that same reticence. Like now with the new book, he's like, well, just send me some pages when you're ready. And I'm like, I will never be ready to just send you a few pages. I'll send you the manuscript and I'll send you the outline, which I did, but I still have those defenses up, not because of anything personal with my editor, but it's more like, I want to give you a book, like a full book, and then you can give me your notes, you know?
Do you ever worry that inadvertent, I don't know, if that feedback, even if meant in the best way, might kill your idea for you? Or might make you second guess it?
I don't know. I'd like to think that I'm at the point where if I really feel strongly about an idea, I can figure out if it's a darling, something that I just like because I like, or if it's something I feel passionate about for story. But yeah, it's just such a tricky alchemy. Like I never want to mess that up. It's why I don't read really a ton of mysteries that are similar to my book anywhere within the range of writing. Like even from the idea stage, like I put the blinders down, and it's like I can't do that. Or any really strong voices in that space. Like if I read a lot of James Ellroy while I'm writing a book, then suddenly my, all the thes and the ises are gone, and it becomes very terse and dark.
I'm like that too. I'm very spongy, right? So
yeah.
it's like if you're reading stuff and you're writing stuff, it's very
But
hard
on the
not
flip
to let it
side,
seep
then I'll
in.
read books that I think are in the tonal wheelhouse. Like I reread a lot of Patricia Highsmith while I was writing Secret Identity because it was so different in terms of content that I felt I could get a feel for what she was doing without aping her or imitating.
Right. That makes sense.
So we talked a little bit about Jenny's process. For you, Alex, when you were writing this book and putting it together, I imagine that with the three types of book, let's say, that you've written, the first being a series or books that were intended to be in a series, the second a Star Wars novel that fit into a very defined universe, or at least a universe that existed to an extent, and then with Secret Identity, which I don't know. I know we've discussed before that it's going to be that there's going to be a sequel, but you haven't discussed if it's going to extend beyond that. I mean, was there a difference or a different challenge in plotting this book and putting it together than those other forms?
Yeah. I mean, I approached it as a standalone. I didn't really realize that there was going to be a sequel until about 2/3 into the book when I had such a great time with those characters that I didn't want to lose them, but also I saw like the little details of a sequel coming together, like the little clues that I didn't even know I was like leaving behind. And so the sequel jumps off right after the epilogue, but it was challenging because I had to basically create all the characters knowing that they would end in a book, but also create the comic book as if I would create a whole comic book. Like, people see those 14 pages and maybe the instinct is, oh, they just focused on those pages and that was it. But we had to create the characters. We had to create, the links to supporting cast. We had to create the narrative arc and the conflict. I guess I'm being really simplistic about I had to create the characters. That's going to happen with any book. But I think for a standalone, you just have a little bit more freedom in terms of ending things, and you don't have to leave things dangling knowing that you're going to have another book. With the Pete books, I would have cliffhangers. So you read Blackout and it ends, and the hope is now that they're all in print, you can just go to the next one in the way a comic book would. But with Secret Identity, I felt some pressure to kind of wrap everything up. And even when I realized there was going to be a sequel, I didn't want it to feel like it picks up right at the end of the book. It not of the main timeline of 1975. That didn't answer your question at all, did it?
Oh, I wasn't.
That was good info.
The no. That was perfect. I do have a question though, and it's something that Jenny touched on earlier, and something that you hinted at in your response as well. I hate the term. I think everybody hates the term brand. your brand and
Brand,
but
yeah.
there's always something with writers where you talk about you mentioned, a James Ellroy novel is going to be terse and it's going to be, the language is used differently and it's very identifiable.
Right.
Do you have as you've been defining your voice over books and coming closer to it, and it seems like you've both realized it, did feedback affect that? Was it ever changed through comments readers made or reviewers? I mean, did the book in print, once it sort of has a life on its own, did that alter your impressions of it and what you're trying to do?
Just to some extent. I don't know if I've allowed too many reader reviews to penetrate, because I know that if I think about that too much, I'll get paralyzed and not be able to write anything.
Yeah.
But sometimes you hear it, right? Or you're tagged in a review, and I pay attention to the things that keep coming up. And like for me, for instance, with my early books, there was always the comment like, this book took a while to get going, but once it did, and I'm like, okay, I got to work on that opening because I'm easing you in, but clearly you want to be thrown in a little faster, right? And then what I hear lately is, I loved it, but the ending was rushed. And I'm like, oh, I got to drag up the ending. But I hear that. And I think it does shape how I write a little bit. But I think Alex will attest to this. You get more confident in your voice, whatever that voice is for you and how you write. There's a moment for me when I started writing Things We Do in the Dark, which is out this summer, where it occurred to me that if I write it well, it's going to be okay. Like whatever kooky idea, whatever thing I'm nervous about pulling off, if I can write it well, and this is advice I got from my agent, it's okay, right? Just write it well. Like whatever you're doing, like go for it and write it well. And so that's stuck with me.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think, like Jen was saying, there were moments early in my career where stuff like that would impact more greatly. Like you spend time reading Goodreads, or you're a new author, so you're hungry for any kind of like feedback from a person you don't know, like isn't in your group or isn't like a friend or isn't an editor or an agent. And I think it's funny, some of the early Pete reviews were, there's too much drinking or there's too much violence or there's too much this, and I'm like, that's the book. Like, like you start to gain confidence and you realize that if you write the book you want to write, that you want to read, and that's usually my rule of thumb, like, let me just write something that I, as a reader, would want to devour, then you're kind of serving that great idea, and we've gotten to the point where I think we can pull it off. We've got the experience and have written a number of books, and sorry, one of my kids is screaming. They're fine.
The Band-Aid will
it'll be good. Yeah, I mean, you get seasoned enough where you understand, like, if I just pour myself into this, I can pull it off. And even Secret Identity, some of the early feedback I got was, well, it takes a while to get started, but that was by design. So I think we start to be confident in our choices.
Right.
It's funny and it's sad in a way, because I ask about feedback, and my initial response, had I been asked that question, your response is all like, well, here's what happens with negative feedback. Writers are so glum. It's never about like, oh, well, how's, when you both were talking, I was thinking like, well, what about you both have experienced, you've had breakthrough moments, right? Jenny won the ITW award. Her Jar of Hearts was nominated for other awards, and as was Little Secrets. And you've had far-reaching success with this book. With Jar of Hearts on forward. And with Alex, you've had a lot of success with Secret Identity. Is that going to change? Is that success going to change anything, do you think? I mean, are you going to, is there a sense of like, well, what I was doing worked for this book really well, I need to figure out what it was and continue it?
That's a good question. I think the challenge is to not not try to repeat myself. And it's even harder, I think. I feel more pressure now because I'm working on a sequel. So I'm really positioning it as a pseudo sequel. Like, you don't have to read Secret Identity to understand what the new book is about. It's going to be its own thing. And it's going to be a spiritual sequel in terms of the characters and some of the themes, but I want it to feel like a completely different novel. And so I think the thing that success does is it makes you up your game. At least it does for me. And I mean, just reading Jen's novels, I know they each get more ambitious. So
Oh, thank
that's the
you.
goal. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say that's very similar for me too. I mean, I feel like I'm only really competing with myself. Um, in hindsight, there's always something I wonder, had I done that differently, would it have been a stronger book? And I hate that feeling because then that feeling never goes away, especially if the book is published. But I think for me, I had to be in it for a while and write a lot of books and get a lot of shitty reviews. And I did. I mean, I've had my share of like really awful, mean reviews, to figure out what it is uh, what I really wanted to say, that it didn't matter what anyone else thought, and for this book, for instance, I went full Filipino with the character, right? And in the past, when I was getting started as a writer, I didn't know if that was okay. I didn't know if people would want to read about, a woman who's a sex addict who's, Filipino, and like, what is that, And I worried about it a lot. And I think as the industry's changed a little bit and as I've grown, I feel like that's a story I can tell now, but it took 7 books. I could not have told this story earlier and done it any justice, because I don't think I would have had the confidence, So I think that's what's changed. But also, I mean, the funny thing that happens when you're selling better, right? And more people know that you have a book, it can be scary and terrifying and nerve-wracking. But so I wonder often how writers who hit bestseller lists with their first book, how they handle that when you haven't ever been in the spotlight like that in any way before. But for me, what I've noticed over the past 7 books is your skin gets thicker. It really does. The lows don't hurt as much or for as long, but the highs don't feel as joyful for as long. You kind of exist somewhere in the middle, and it's necessary for you to keep going.
Yeah, to survive.
But you have to kind of not take it too seriously as you're going along. But I miss the feeling of pure joy when something great happens. I don't miss the feeling of being in bed all day because of a bad PW review. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, which has happened. So, I mean, you evolve, and I hope we keep evolving. I never want to be an author who's accused of phoning it in. That's my biggest fear.
Yeah. You never want it to feel like, oh, he's just cranking out another one,
Yeah.
And that, what you touched on, something that is one of the bits of advice I try to give to other writers, like spend as much time on the bad reviews as you do on the good reviews. Because I know whenever I would get a good review, I'd be like, where's the other one? Where's the next one? Like, give me more candy. You want the next like hit of the good stuff. But when you get a bad review, like you said, it overwhelms your day. You just feel and so I try to balance it out. And I also try not to spend as much time on Goodreads.
Yes, that's not a good place to go for authors. So don't go there.
Yeah. It's for readers. It's not for authors.
It's for readers. Right, exactly.
It's very hard for me to get. So I've been fortunate. I mean, I've only had 2 books that have been in the trades, but they both received good reviews. And I don't go to Goodreads because I did not receive good reviews there, and it really bummed me out. But I wondered, with that, like, is there? I have a real problem reading reviews, good or bad. I find, it's like, I don't know how you react, but if somebody comes out, like, when my old job, when I was, before, when we were in offices and my books came out, coworkers would come up to me and talk to me about the books as they were reading them. And I just wanted to die. I hated it so much. And it was the nicest thing, right? It's the nicest thing for someone to come over and say, I'm reading your book and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm like, oh God, don't tell me that. I can't.
It's always awkward when it's in a setting that you're not prepared for. You're not in a bookstore.
It's outside book world. Yeah. It's outside
like,
the world
I
of
guess
that.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, but I find it with reviews. I actually have Nancy. I have my wife. Read the review first, and then I'm like,
that's good.
What can I pull
She's
out
your
of this?
filtering system, right?
Yeah, it's not even even I don't think I've honestly read a full good review all the way through. I had
my wife. I had Eva read the PW review for Secret Identity, because it was the first trade review, and I just didn't know where the book was going to land. Like, I felt confident, I liked it, like the people I trusted had read it and liked it, but it was kind of like the kickoff party. And she read it and she was like, "Did you notice there's a little star here? Like, that's a good thing." Like, I was just like, so like, I was just like, please read this and tell me if it's good. But I do that sometimes too. It's just, you need that filter.
Yeah. I have a scanning method that I do when I get sent a review where,
Let's
you know,
scroll
you
to
see
the
in the
end.
subject line, like library journal or whatever. I scroll through it extremely fast,
Yeah.
you know, looking for keywords like dismal or disappointing, right? Or predictable, you know, or unsatisfied. So I have that kind of brain wired. And then if I don't see those, I then go back and I read it calmly all the way through. And even if it's mixed, if I don't see those keywords, I feel okay about it. But you know, if I see a keyword like that, I delete it. Actually, I don't. I just close my laptop and I check back on a different day because it's a lot when you know that you're going to get, you know, hammered. So, I mean, and that's the worst. This is the worst part because my book is not coming out for 3 months, but this is the time when things are beginning to roll in.
And it's a great conversation to have for you, huh?
It's just scary. It's scary.
Really
And I
get in
get
the
that
zone.
it's subjective and I get that everyone's going to love it, but you know, you still want everyone to love it, you know?
Yeah.
We didn't write to be hated, right? Like you write to be enjoyed, right? So it's always a bummer when someone doesn't like it.
The you know, there's two things I want to mention. The first is if anybody has questions, just leave them in the comments and we'll answer them as we go. I can also leave time at the end, but I'm happy to answer them as, oh, there's one right there. And then the second thing, and I should have done this from the beginning, but bad moderator, I should have. Can each of you give us a summary or the elevator pitch of your books?
Sure. Do you want me to go first? Or?
Yeah, you go first because I have to think of mine.
Okay. Secret Identity is set in 1975 New York, and the protagonist is a queer Cuban-American woman, Carmen Valdez, who moves from her hometown of Miami to pursue her dream of writing comics. She grows up reading comics with her dad. It's a very important part of her childhood and young adulthood. And she gets a job as a secretary at this third-rate publisher called Triumph Comics. And she uses this opportunity to basically pitch stories to her boss, who's the publisher of the company. And it all comes to a head when he basically says, look, I'm never going to buy a script from you. It's just not going to work. It's not the plan I have for you. I have a line of people out the door that I want to keep fed with freelance work. And how would it look if I gave my secretary a job? It would just be weird. And so his misogynistic approach really sends her into a spiral, and she feels despondent, but she's driven. Carmen is very driven and focused. So when a colleague, this younger guy named Harvey from work, approaches her and says, I got this assignment to launch the company's first female superhero. I have nothing. I'm completely unprepared. Would you help me write it? And her first thought is, well, why? Why are you asking me? And he admits that he knows that she's been pitching stories, but there's a wrinkle. She has to do it anonymously, and eventually she'll get the credit. But, you know, just to start, let's do it anonymously. And once things get rolling, we'll tell our boss that you co-wrote it. And like I said, she's very smart, but she's also, you know, when your dream is dangled in front of your eyes, what do you say? So she takes the assignment. They collaborate on this character called the Legendary Lynx, and it becomes a huge hit for Triumph, like their first big hit to like compete with Marvel and DC. And Harvey's killed. And so she has to basically investigate his murder to figure out what happened to her friend, but also to reclaim this thing that meant so much to her, this character that was really a culmination of ideas from her childhood. And interspersed in the novel are actual comic book sequences drawn by Sandy Jarrell that feature the evolving story of the comic. So you see it when Carmen writes it and it's drawn by this amazing artist. You see it when other writers and artists take over and she loses control. So it's a very meta conversation between the comics and the prose, and it's a noir murder mystery. And yeah.
And it's awesome.
Thank you.
All right, me? Okay.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So Things We Do in the Dark stars a Filipino protagonist named Paris. And she is married. She's like in her late 30s, and she's married to a much, much older guy who's in his late 60s. And he is a retired comedian actor who's kind of in the twilight years of his life. But he decides he wants to make a comeback, and he's going to do it big. He's going to stream a couple of comedy specials on a Netflix-like streaming show or platform. But then she wakes up one morning and he's dead. And he's dead in the bathtub, and there's blood everywhere, and she's covered in blood and holding the straight razor that appears to have killed him. And she's arrested for murdering her husband. And as we kind of follow her on this journey. She gets, booked. She has to hire a lawyer. We learn that the thing she's most terrified of is being in the spotlight, because when she married Jimmy, she thought he was retired and they were going to have a quiet life. But now with the streaming stuff happening and her arrest, which is super high profile and it's everywhere, she's worried that someone from her past is going to see her, which has been her whole purpose, is not to be found, because it turns out in a previous life, she might have done something similar. So it's basically her trying to outrun her past. So
it's really good.
Oh, it's
so good.
They're both amazing. They're, like I said, it's this is an absolute murderer's row of a year for crime fiction. It's very cool to be on the sidelines watching it and waiting for next year when
the year of Ed.
Yeah, that's just
yeah.
I had two I had a question for each of you about your books, which is why I wanted you to go into the summaries of them. And one thing, we talk about breakthrough books, and some of that comes from the sense that the author's taking a risk. And what struck me from both your books are the risks that you took in different ways, and I wanted to ask you about each of those. For Alex, my sense is, so you are the biggest comic book fan I know. You have an unabashed love for the form. I think I'm a comic book fan. I'm nothing compared to you. And your book really, is such a loving embrace of that. And I wonder if, were you concerned? Are comic book fans crime fiction readers? Do those two converge, or were crime fiction fans did you worry that they were gonna read this and go like, I'm not, it's fine, but I'm not into comic books?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a Venn diagram and there is some overlap, but it's definitely not a one-for-one. So the challenge I faced was, the books I love, the mystery novels I love, take me somewhere else, whether it's a different culture, a different place, a different point of view, and I'm learning and I'm absorbing as I'm enjoying the ride, whether it's like a place steeped in setting like Laura Lippman's Baltimore or Pelicanos's DC. And, something that Megan Abbott does really well is she will introduce noir elements into a setting you wouldn't expect, like gymnastics or cheerleading or science. And so when I went into Secret Identity, I wanted to kind of have that mentality of bringing these noir elements into comic books, but I knew it couldn't feel like a Wikipedia entry. So, in terms of like explaining things. So when you hear some of the characters interacting, I don't take detours to explain what they're talking about. Basically, I wanted it to feel something like you're living in that space. So when Carmen and Harvey are talking about Jim Starlin, I don't pause the narrative to be like, Jim Starlin was born in this town and he drew Captain Marvel and blah, blah, blah. Or, and on the flip side, I want the mystery readers who are coming in just because they want to enjoy a mystery novel to not feel overwhelmed by the comic stuff. I want it to be there. I want it to be texture, atmospheric and context, but not hammer them over their head. So my hope is, to get to the point, my hope is that mystery readers will leave the book and say, well, yeah, I'm going to check out some comics. These sound really interesting. Like they name dropped a few things that I may want to pick up on. There's a huge afterword to the book where I kind of list all the things I read while researching or was inspired by. And on the other end, for comic fans, I hope that they feel I got it right. I had a ton of beta readers who lived and worked in the industry at the time and did a lot of fact checking for me. So I want them to feel like all the Easter eggs that are there are cool and interesting and kind of add to the mystery. So
I one thing you did so beautifully, I just love this, is I had the sense that somebody who has zero interest or knowledge about comic books would find the book engaging and interesting and would read it as fast as I did. And a veteran of the comic book industry would have the same reaction.
Oh, good.
And it's beautiful. It's just such a lovely dynamic that you managed to strike between.
It's good. I mean, I don't know anything about the comic book world, but I'm not feeling like I'm being preached to, right?
Oh,
Alex,
good.
your book is it's a good story. that takes place in a setting that I don't know, but I'm here for it. You know,
Oh,
I'm
thank
learning
you.
as I go, but it's a story, and I find it really entertaining.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I just didn't want it to feel like a tutorial for comics. Like if you
Right.
know comics and you're reading it, you'll get a bunch of stuff, and if you
Yeah.
don't know comics and you're reading it, hopefully you'll get a fun mystery. So
Right.
And with Jenny, I remember with I feel this way about all your books, but to use the last few just for this purpose. Like I remember reading Little Secrets and stopping and telling my wife, I could not write this book. I mean, this is she's going places emotionally in with the characters that I don't think I'd want to go to. And in What We Do in the Dark, there's the same uh, premise, especially from the widower's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I how do you fuck yourself up like that, man? How do you? I mean, it's got to be rough. How do you
Yeah.
do
I mean,
you
first
pull
drafts
back?
for me are intense because this is my time when I can go all of the way, right? It doesn't mean that it's going to be published this way, but with the really dark scenes, like there was a dark scene in Little Secrets where the mom is having a hard time dealing with a friend whose child turned up dead. Her son is missing. She's in a missing support group, and one of the people in the group has finally found out what her son was, and he's dead. When she's processing those emotions, I'm trying to put myself in that place to get it to feel like it's authentic to me. Doesn't mean that I feel the way everyone else would feel, but I go dark, right? And I go really, really, really dark, and sometimes graphically so, in order to put myself in that headspace. And when I come back up, I feel sick. I literally, I just wrote a scene with this, and you feel kind of awful and need a shower. That happened to me too in Things We Do in the Dark, where there was a scene that was just very difficult for me as a writer to stomach when I read it back. But I think that first draft is really the time to see how far you can push it. And then in rewrites, when I go back, I know when I've gone too far. And that happened again with this new book, where I went back and I read that scene over again. I'm like, yeah, no, I cannot say all of these things. I have to sketch it out a little looser because that I can't. But I don't ever want to hold back. And I think I did that with the first 4 books. And with Jar of Hearts, it wasn't under contract. And I wasn't sure I would ever get published again. That was kind of the place I was in my career, that I thought, well, fuck it. I'm going to write the book, the serial killer love story that I've always wanted to write. And I don't fucking care. Like, if it gets published, great. If it doesn't, at least I can say I went for it one last time. I have to feel okay walking away from this. And I wrote it, and it was fun. Oh my God, it was fun giving myself permission to not worry about, is it going to sell? Who does this appeal to, right? Like Alex said, I wrote it for me. This is the book I would love to read. But I think it's always about giving yourself permission to do the thing you really want to do. Because like in life, we're not really allowed to do that, right? But in books, gloves are off, right? We can write whatever we want. So I don't know. It's a false fearlessness.
it's great though.
Right?
I love as a reader when you're reading a book and you can tell the author's like cutting loose. It doesn't feel like it fits into a bucket. Like it's very much like its own thing. And I felt that when I was reading your book. I felt that a few times with some books that are coming out this year. But it's hard to explain. But you can tell that the author isn't thinking about restraint. Like they're just cutting loose, which is amazing.
Yeah.
One of the one thing that I want to clarify is that we keep talking about books like post Jar Hearts and pre Jar Hearts, and those books pre Jar Hearts.
That's my line, though, right?
It's not. It
that's
shouldn't
the
be,
line in my
because
career.
those were the books that defined you and your writing, and those were the books that earned you a ton of fans, myself included.
Thank you.
I was your ride or die as a fan from Creep, which I had the opportunity a year or 2 ago to reread. And as a first novel, I was really irritated because first novels should be a lot worse than that. It's fantastic. It still
It is
holds
very
up.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's colored. Like for me, those first 4 books are colored by, a publisher that wasn't super enthusiastic, right? And feeling a little bit invisible. next to bigger named authors, which is a really common thing and is usually the case at most places. And so I think that really influenced how I felt about those books, right? Is this might not be a book worthy of more marketing. Maybe it's not worthy of more whatever, right? And I think having a publisher that supports you, that's made a huge difference for me. It's not about achieving success or sales. It really isn't. It's not about money. It's about feeling like you're supported. And I was just talking with my agent about that today, of how lucky I am, because it really is luck in a lot of ways to have that kind of support, that they respect my vision for what I want to do, for where I want to go, and are not trying to change that or derail that. They're trying to provide support for that. And I think that's given me permission as well to really swing for the fences. I can live with failure, like rejection, right? Every rejection we get, every bad review we get, that's like a failure in a way, right? And we've been through so much of that I think I can handle it if it fails. I just can't handle it if I didn't try.
Yeah, 100%.
So we have one more question about reviews, and then we'll go to happy.
It's fun to talk about.
Yeah, review chat.
This is from DC writer Chris Chambers, who says, "What's worse in reviews? Somebody who harps on a craft issue, like a plot hole or a weird change in a character, or a reviewer who says, 'I just don't get it'?" And I suppose it could be a reviewer or any reader offering a review of your work to that extent.
I will take a thoughtful negative review over a knee-jerk "this sucks" review any day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even though you could probably dismiss the sucks review. I mean, there's
an inherent cruelty in just dropping a "this sucks" that I can't get over.
Yeah.
It just feels like, why do you have to do that? Like,
I've had my share of both, I've made the mistake of following my own hashtag on Instagram, which I don't recommend anybody do, but I can't seem to unfollow it. So even if I'm not tagged,
just look for it in the search.
Hashtag has been used, right? It's like I will see it in my own feed. I'll be scrolling through and I'll see it in my feed.
Yeah.
And I got that "this sucks" review on Little Secrets, where the reviewer, the bookstagrammer, basically said, "This book is so dumb. I'm just gonna be honest with you guys. It's the dumbest book. This is dumb. That is dumb. It ended dumb. The plot twist was dumb," right? And I'm reading this, and she didn't seem particularly mean. She just really seemed to think it was a dumb book. And that was one that actually penetrated. That one stung. But I've also gotten emails, very specific emails from people who have, it's like getting an editorial letter. These are all the things that could have been improved. I'm not sure why you made that decision that way. And I got one from a woman who, she emailed all the things that she didn't like about it, things that didn't make sense. And I wanted to respond to her because I saw that she was a writer herself, or had been a writer at one point. I know, don't respond. But I very politely said, thank you for asking these questions. It's clear that you had a reaction to the book. And I did my best to answer. And I sent her a really long, response, and nothing snarky, just a really long response, trying to answer her questions. And then I didn't hear from her for a year. A year went by, and I'm like, I don't know who that person was. And then a year later, right, she replied to that email, so you can see the exchange, asking if I would blurb her next book.
I almost spit out my seltzer.
Her name is Joanne, okay? And I'm like, you gotta be fucking, the balls on this chick, right?
Wow.
No. So that was an automatic deleting ball response. But I'm like, but they sting to but Alex is right? You just have to, you gotta let that go. I mean, there's a cruelty there, like you said, and there's no way to respond to that at all.
And
I think the most I've ever done is when somebody I've ever done is when somebody tags me in a negative review. I just respond with, "Thanks for reading," because I am thankful you've bought the book or you've engaged with the content to some degree. So
exactly.
But even
and
then,
of course, if they tag you, they want you to see it clearly.
Yeah.
So I mean,
and we'll see them anyway. We find the bad reviews.
We do.
Yeah.
Do you have, we're talking about readers, do you have an ideal reader for each of your books? Is there somebody that when you're writing, that you picture?
It used to be my mom. My mom was who introduced me to thrillers, because she used to buy all the thrillers back when I was, growing up and a teenager, in my 20s. But now, honestly, it's just me. It's hard for me to put a face on the reader that I write for. It's maybe a little bit you, Ed. It's mostly me. It's a little bit my mom. And it's maybe like the image of someone whose writing I really respect, like Laura Lippman or Alistair Burke, where I picture, are they going to read this and think it's good? Or are they going to like it, right? But it's more vague than it used to be. It used to be my mom, for sure, for a long time.
I think, yeah, a lot of it is not to sound egotistical, but it's me. It's like, what's the book that's going to entertain me, that I want to read, that doesn't feel like everything else I've read, that is the kind of thing that only I would really want to read. And the hope is that other people will want to read it too. But yeah, also like the people that got me into this, like the authors that I read and was inspired by, like to think like, oh, Laura Lippman might be reading my book, or Dennis Lehane reading a book of mine. Like these are obviously like little fantasies we have in our mind, but that's the hope, that you're kind of pulling from these books and learning and getting better.
So we're going to turn this positive in the 10 minutes that we have, 5 to 10 minutes we have left. So 2 things I want to point out from the comments. One is every thriller fan should read Creep, such a great first novel to set up the trilogy so well. And Wonderland is so fun and different than pretty much anything else I've ever read. And I love it.
Thank you, Aaron.
And I'd love to hear more about the Lynx comic book coming out. I'm not a comic person, but I'm so excited for this one.
Sure. Yeah. So the idea, like I said, when we came up with the Lynx stuff for Secret Identity, we did it as Sandy and I brainstormed the way we would with any comic. And so while we were working on those sequences, we kept saying, well, now we have to do the comic book. We have to do the comic book. So we're going to debut it digitally next year on this platform called Zest World, and then print it later. But basically, it's going to be very meta. It'll be a collection of comics that came out in 1975. It's going to have an introduction from an actual comic book writer saying how inspired they were by the legendary Lynx. It's going to have articles, like historical articles, talking about the Lynx and the history of Triumph Comics. So it's very much, my name will be in there, like maybe in the indicia, but it's going to be treated very like in world.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah, no kidding. I don't know how you have the time.
I don't either.
I
don't do anything else.
This is your closing event for your book tour, right?
Yeah, this is the grand finale. So thanks for
Woohoo.
partying with me.
How many events did you do?
You survived.
Yeah, I survived. I basically did an event every day since book launch, except weekends.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's great.
That's a lot.
And aside from the one I had to reschedule because I was felled by the flu.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, but I did it. I got back to it.
So my last question is, what are the biggest challenges for a crime fiction writer today? Not a debut writer necessarily, but an established writer.
I mean, I think I've long given up trying to write something wholly original, although Alex pulled it off with his book. Damn you.
You do that.
Damn you. Because it's in crime fiction, if it hasn't been written about in a book, it's happened in real life. Every crime you can think of, every criminal that you could imagine as the villain, it exists somewhere in the world, it feels like. So I think the biggest challenge is taking those ideas, the things that we see in the news, the things that we read about in crime novels that we love, and finding a way to put my spin on it, trying to keep it fresh, because it will be fresh in someone else's voice, and try to make it interesting and entertaining and whatever for the audience that I have. And that's the challenge, right? Because you can go, missing kid story, or, book about serial killer, or how do you keep it fresh? It's hard. That's the biggest challenge, is to write those fresh over and over again.
Your advice from way back when, and you said it before, it's hard to get published. It's even harder to stay published.
It is.
It's so true.
It is.
I never really thought about it, because the struggle to get published is so difficult, and you cross over, and then staying published. I mean, it's so, one thing I've been talking about lately, I just talked to a writing class last week about, just realizing how much of this is entertainment. You're in the entertainment industry, and it is a cutthroat industry where projects get lifted up and dropped like that. It happens, and it's a
I write every book like it's my last book. I really do. Same. Because you've been around for a long time, right, Alex? And you've heard every story, every possible outcome of an author's career. Some of them aren't writing anymore. Some of them change genres, change names. It's a hard career to stay alive in. And so I write every book like it might very well be the last time I get to publish one. I want to make sure that I go out with a strong novel, because I would hate that shitty book of mine that I phoned in is the last one that I wrote, you know?
Something tells me that's not going to happen.
You never know.
Yeah, no, I think something Jen said was very true. You have to keep yourself engaged. I have to find the passion. If I don't have the passion for the project, then it's, it feels like, yeah, you don't want to phone it in. And that's the challenge. How do I I'm not a good researcher unless I'm obsessed with what I'm researching. So I need to tap into that emotional obsession that's going to drive me to the project and keep myself engaged, keep it, have it not feel boring or repetitive. And the other side of that is also, how can I keep doing that, but also be a big part of the community in terms of helping the community and being engaged in the community without being perpetually tapped into the discourse. I think there's always something that can be brought up, something that we can engage in and talk about. But I think the thing I get the most out of is helping other authors and like reaching out to authors and like supporting them and being part of the community. But also you have to be, I think as my career continues, I have to be mindful of, I have to also look out for myself too. It's
your
hard.
time and energy are precious too, right? And the reason everyone is asking you for your support, whatever, right, is because you got where you are. So there's that fine balance between I want to stay where I am and hopefully continue to grow, but I also know that I didn't get here on my own, right? And so then I got to give back in whatever ways I'm able to. But oh man, it's a fine balance.
It's hard, and it's also, making sure that we feel like the community we're part of is the community we want to be, want it to be, in terms of diversity, in terms of inclusion, in terms of just how we operate. And I think we're getting better, but I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, there's a ways to go.
Yeah.
So I want to end on one last two-part question. What, give me your best moment so far in publishing, and give me an item on your writer's bucket list.
Best moment.
Or one of them.
No, he said best.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd never been reviewed in the Times before. So when I saw the Secret Identity review in the Times, it blew me away. And I was like, oh, I guess this thing might turn out okay.
That's a big deal.
It just felt huge.
That would be my bucket list item, absolutely.
A New York Times review?
Yeah, I think so. As long as it's not eviscerating my book, right? But I don't think they would waste that space on a book they hated from an author like me. I'm not like Stephen King where it might be fun to. Right. I hope. I just jinxed it, didn't I?
No, you'll be fine.
No, you're fine.
My best moment for me was, sorry, Alex,
go ahead.
It actually just happened 3 days ago, and I can't tell anyone.
Oh, wow.
And now I'm that annoying author that is like, vaguely whatever, which I hate. I hate that.
That's exciting,
who does that all the time, right? But yeah, no, it was a happy moment. And I thought, oh my God, I'm actually feeling joy over something joyful, but I can't tell anyone.
I will be texting you in about 3
I understand.
minutes.
I will echo you in that. Like my bucket, my bucket list thing is very close, so I'm not even going to jinx it.
Okay, yeah, I respect that. I think I jinxed it by saying New York Times review.
No, you didn't.
No, you didn't. That's the thing.
But I think that it's for all of us. Right? I think a lot of us feel that way.
The actor.
It just felt like, okay,
we just texted. Tell me.
Yeah, well, tell me now.
We're not even done.
No, it's that the actor who played what was the movie, the Marvel movie, the 10 Rings, Legend of the 10 Rings,
Shang-Chi.
Yeah, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the 10 Rings, who, right, like a year or two earlier, he had put a tweet out saying, "Hey, Marvel, you need to make a movie with Asian lead. I'm available."
That's right.
Or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
And then,
and it happened. He manifested.
You got to manifest it. Yeah.
You're right. Yep. You're right. You got to speak
manifest it.
I do believe in that, though. I do.
I do too.
Yeah. You know what I do? This is my secret thing. Is I write the publisher's marketplace book deal announcement for the next contract that has not remotely happened yet, but I put it down just because if I look at it, maybe it will happen.
It will happen. That works.
I put it in my phone and I carry it around.
That's so cool. But that's a great technique too, to make sure.
And I invent things. It's like the announcement is like best-selling author, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You have to. You have to
Of
believe in
the,
yourself. Yeah.
Edgar Award-winning, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. Jennifer Hillier's next 2 books, right? And some ridiculous amount, but I do that because it keeps me, I don't know. I think the fun part of our job is we get to dream, and some people's, careers can really blow up, and why not us, right? Like,
Yeah.
why not me? So
Yeah.
might as well dream about it.
You're doing the work. So
Yeah. Yeah.
So before we go, I want to say one thing that I hope. So I sort of love this conversation, and I hope that one thing we didn't touch on, and I should have, but the three of us talked about it before, is the community and how active you both are in the community. And you were both so generous to me when I reached out to you. Neither of you knew who I was, and I was just fans of your work and fans of you each. And I'm happy to count you both
you're stuck with
as
us as friends
my
now.
closest friends.
Yeah.
And
Or the barnacles on your boat.
I hope that warmth came through to people listening, because there's getting to be here, getting to be on this side of these discussions is really just irreplaceable. So thank you to
Thanks for
both
having
of
us.
you for taking the
Thanks
time.
for having us.
Yeah.
And one more page for hosting
Thank you, the
us.
bookstore. Yes, one more
Yes,
page.
this was really
you.
fun.
You're
Thank you.
awesome.
And look at that, we're at 1:05. That's amazing.
Woo-hoo!
I'm
Wow.
so good.
So
Fastest
tiny.
minute ever.
Hour, sorry.
Thank you, Ed.
I think I like Kyle's quote. He says, in his experience, the Venn diagram between authors who write good books worth reading, and authors that are kind to other authors is a single circle. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that we also love about hosting author events, is just seeing the really tight community and the supportive environment that you all provide to each other, and the supporting of each other with your good news and manifesting your dreams. So I want to thank you all so much, Alex and Jennifer and Ed, for joining us tonight. And Alex, I hope you get to go have a drink now after at the end of your book.
I'm having my seltzer. It's
He's
gonna be
been
a party.
Good.
Yeah.
Party hardy.
Yeah.
No, because at the end he was like, I just write, I don't know.
Just spill. Yeah. Thanks so much for having us. Thanks, Ed. Those were great questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.